notice how we don't do much to Kim Jong Un except talk from time to time about him in adverse terms. But look what we're doing to Iran. So, how better to prove to the world if you have a problem with the empire, you need a nuclear weapon.
There is a backstory to the strikes on Iran that has nothing to do with what you hear in the media today, even as Trump threatens to flatten all of Tehran. These strikes on Iran were planned years ago, and I will show in a moment the document. Not in response to any threat, not because of a nuclear weapon, but because this is part of a ploy to reshape the whole region. I know you have heard this before, but I show you some details that will surprise you. And now they're using force to topple Iran's regime. Mind you, they will try to topple Iran's regime. I think Trump already mentioned or indicated it. To complete the unfinished blueprint that's guided US and Israeli strategy since the early 2000s. The tried and tested tools are war, bombing campaigns, deception, and most and foremost, media complicity to finish what in Iraq and Syria began. And you don't spend this long planning a war and then call it self-defense or preemptive. That's the first thing we need to understand about what happened on June 13, which is now 5 days ago. That was the day Israel launched its surprise strike on Iran. And that's also the very same day I sat down with Colonel Larry Wilkerson, virtually just as this all unfolded. So let's drop the euphemism, this wasn't preemption, this was an execution. A month-long deception campaign run jointly by Israel and the United States designed to trick Tehran into believing diplomacy was at work. Netanyahu even pretended to be on vacation. Why? Because Iran's military leadership needed to feel safe. They needed to stay in one place. And they did, right where Israel wanted them. The point wasn't just to bomb Iran's infrastructure. It was to decapitate Iran's complete command structure. And they succeeded. You can't do that if the targets scatter. So you lie, you bait, you lull them into stillness. And then you strike. That's why conversations like the one I had with Colonel Wilkerson matter. Because he has seen this before, virtually from the inside. He helped prepare the case for war in Iraq and he watched it unravel. And now he's here again, watching the same machinery spin up. Only this time the stakes are even higher. And the lies and deception, they're much more sophisticated. Colonel Larry Wilkerson, the man who was the chief of staff for Colin Powell, and the man in the previous session told me that what Colin Powell showed at the UN in this little glass tube was actually salt. I will never forget. How are you?
I'm good, I think. The
You think?
world's not. Yeah, the world's not.
Yes. Before we start, you wrote me an email yesterday saying you will join this interview if you're not getting arrested, you and your friends. Can you tell us what this was about?
Well, I'm really worried what's happening in my country right now. I see a, a repeat in many respects, but with very sophisticated permutations of what happened between 1850 and 1860, even 1840 to 1860. I see divisions in this country, in other words, that are leading us to a civil war. And what's going to happen with those divisions at some very propitious point, I think, is a coup. And I think we're seeing the preparation for that coup right now, coup d'etat. Um, and I think what I would say about January the 6th, for example, is that it did not fail because the system held, it failed because the coup plotters were incompetent. And I do not think they'll make that mistake again. I think we're looking at not only the ingredients of a civil war, but those ingredients will produce the conditions from which the coup will be successful.
To ask the obvious question, who do you think will commit the coup?
Well, it's obviously going to be the administration and its backers that are in business right now. I don't even know, and strongly suspect that Trump is an actual cognitive part of this effort. I think it's people around Trump and people outside of the administration, if you will, who have been planning this for some time. Many historians would say this is a movement that's been happening at least since 1930 and even before that. And it's raised its ugly head a number of times, most prominently in the 30s, and a couple of times after that, but always been rather well put down, if you will, because the forces in power realized what was happening and took action to stop it from occurring. I don't think the forces in power now are going to be able to stop it from happening. I think it includes people like Steve Miller, maybe even Steve Bannon, and others that have been identified from time to time around the current president. But many people in the shadows too, people like Peter Thiel, for example, people
Yeah.
like Elon Musk, for example, all of whom want a better leadership for the future, which they think is going to be an AI dominated technological future more than anything else, and they will lead it. And they don't see democracy as being a form of government that's conducive to exploiting that and making them even more successful than they already are. So they want to change.
Colonel, when I originally reached out in regards to this interview, I thought we're going to discuss the attack on Russia's pillar of the nuclear trident by Ukraine. Yeah. Of course, now with what happened today with the attacks, the Israel attacks on Israel, I would like to center on that topic. Just one thing that reminded me when what you just explored about the coup in the US. I had an interview with Ilan Pappe most recently, and he said exactly the same in regards to Israel. He fears there will be a civil war, and he is very explicit. He thinks the left forces will lose. So I gather it from your statements that you have similar sentiments when it comes to the US.
Yes, I do. And I don't think what you just described as the topics you wanted to discuss are completely divorced from this. I think they're very much a part of it. And particularly the situation in the Levant, but also the situation in Europe. Because what these people wanted out of the situation in Europe was an arresting of the, I think, inexorable movement of power away from the American empire and towards the East, away from the West and towards the East, with the magnet of that pull being China, but increasingly China and Russia, because we've made the greatest strategic error one could make if one is in the Western Hemisphere. We've caused Russia and China to get together. So Ukraine and the problems with Iran, and indeed the problems throughout the whole arc, if you will, of instability, are all part of this. They're all part of these people trying to arrest the deterioration of the empire, and they think totalitarianism will do that better than democracy.
Before we have a look at the geopolitical aspect of this whole saga, let's briefly discuss the actual attack from Israel on Iran. So it was a quite extensive attack. By coincidence or fate of by stroke of fate, I yesterday evening published a newsletter about the coming attack on Iran. I had no clue it's that quick because this morning the first thing I heard, it was already ongoing. Yeah. So from your perspective, this is not, how should I say this? This must go at least back to Biden. This is not an operation that takes a couple of weeks. So that means that it's a bipartisan agreement to have this attack on Iran.
I think we're looking at a situation, and let me back up a moment and give you a description of a previous situation that I think is a good example of what has just happened that didn't happen on the previous occasion. And let me just fuzz over it a little bit so I don't have to go into the details because this was all highly classified. But at a moment in 1990, when Colin Powell asked me, as chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, to give him some strategic advice that included a portion on how to essentially bamboozle Saddam Hussein, how to make Saddam Hussein think we weren't going to attack at the point and place where we were, rather than the opposite. And I gave him a paper. I gave him a single page paper on how to do it. He read the paper and he said, "This is really, really good, but I'm not going to do it because it involves hoodwinking the American people, because they will take the same information and they will understand afterwards what we did." I wanted to be more direct. I wanted to be more, if you will, acceptable in the eyes of the Western world. And I understood that. And I went and I shredded the paper. It was classified at the ether level. I shredded it.
Are you sure? Are you sure you
Yeah.
shredded it? They're not reusing it?
There was only one copy. And I made sure of that. So we had that kind of relationship. So here's why I say that. Here's why I say that. Because what we did categorically was we told the Iranians we were going to continue negotiations. We told the Iranians that there wasn't going to be any attack. That's what that meant to them. That's what everybody knew it meant. And then we knew the damn attack was coming, and we assisted and expedited and made that attack as successful as it was, apparently. And now the Secretary of State of the United States of America is lying through his teeth and denying that to try and prevent retaliation on other assets the United States has in the Gulf. This is unconscionable statecraft. Unconscionable statecraft. It's what dictatorships do. It's what autocracies do. It's not what democracies do. Democracies limp towards war. They don't go full force towards war. They go reluctantly toward war. And then they steel themselves for that war. And if they triumph, they triumph. But they don't use subterfuge. They don't use the kinds of things that we have obviously done here. And look at what it means, too. It's like the cell phone business with Israel. They have been infiltrating trucks with drones into Iran for some period with MI6, Mossad, and CIA help. And those were unleashed to more or less, as I understand it, and it makes sense militarily, reduce Iran's air defense capability. In other words, these things came out of nowhere and suddenly flew against in very protected environments, because they only had to go a few feet, literally, and attack the air defense systems, just like the cell phones did with Hezbollah in Lebanon. This takes a long time in the planning. So all of this had to be set up well in advance. So we knew it was coming, and yet we were negotiating supposedly in good faith. And we knew, we can't argue that, well, we were keeping this powder dry so that we could bring it out if the Iranians really stonewall in the negotiations. You weren't keeping it dry. Israel was always going to use it, and you knew it. Jordan was always going to approve the overflight of the Israeli aircraft, and you knew it, and brought pressure on the king of Jordan to get it to happen. And all the other things you did, you knew all these things, and you let that surprise the Iranians, because they even never thought you would be that duplicitous. But you were. And now Trump comes out with a tweet that actually says, if you read between the lines, ha, 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 we did that. And you're going to get even more of it if you don't go do what we want you to do. This is not what democracies do. But I have to say quickly, we're not a democracy anymore. We're an empire. We're an empire run by fools.
This whole saga reminds me strikingly at the Minsk Accords. I don't want to, go in a different direction now.
Same thing. Same thing.
Yeah.
Angela Merkel got it right. We never intended to follow through on any of that in a positive way. We were just giving Ukraine time to arm.
Yeah, François Mitterrand also said it. Yeah.
Yeah.
So what does that mean for, and again, I want to come back to the original topic, but what does it mean for future negotiations with, for example, Russia or China? Because they see what's coming. The West negotiates with them at the same time when they're preparing to attack. So what does this say for future? Please.
I cannot imagine why Sergei Lavrov or Vladimir Putin or anyone in the Russian complex or Xi Jinping and his crew, Wang Yi. I can't imagine why either one of them would ever trust us in negotiations of any sort, trade negotiations, economic negotiations in general, military negotiations, security negotiations. I can't imagine. They will be ready to go at a moment's notice with nuclear weapons if necessary, anytime the empire is dealing with them, and will not trust us in any way, fashion, or form. And I don't blame them.
That's exactly what Brzezinski warned, to drive Russia in the arms of China. And someone said to me, I think it was US Ambassador Just Freeman, I'm not sure. He said they're even more stupid. They put North Korea in the mix.
Yes, you got it. A nuclear armed North Korea in the midst.
Yeah.
Notice how we don't do much to Kim Jong Un except talk from time to time about him in adverse terms. But look what we're doing to Iran. So, how better to prove to the world if you have a problem with the empire, you need a nuclear weapon.
Exactly. So, what will be the response? I mean, I don't mean the direct response from Iran in terms of retaliation, but down the line, what will be the reaction of Iran on the topic of nuclear armament? You think they give it up?
Well, first, I think there will be retaliation once they
Agree.
get the leadership problem. They about lost all their leadership, Revolutionary Guard, the Iranian armed forces, all. Um, I think they'll go for a nuclear weapon now. That's my decision, or that's my view. They'll go for a nuclear weapon. They'll make that decision. They'll build it underground, and it will be a fait accompli in about a year and a half. Maybe sooner, because I don't think they damage that portion of the nuclear weapons potential complex, the threshold complex. And if you're at 60%, at which they are, I think it's only a week or two.
Enrichment. We have to be
Yeah,
specific. 60%
right,
enrichment. Yeah.
right. It's only a week or two to the point where you could do the full capability for a nuclear weapon. And the problem they have, which is to make it small enough, packageable enough to put it in a warhead and then make that missile and warhead work, that usually would take probably a year or two. But I suspect the North Koreans gave them enough of that while they were there working with them to where the Iranians could abbreviate that period considerably, maybe even down to a couple of months.
Mm. But Netanyahu already said this is a multi-day operation, so this is not over today.
No, I wouldn't put it past them to conduct another 200 plane strike.
Yeah. And I mean, that's the thing that surprised me a little bit. There was nothing whatsoever, as far as we know, yeah. There was nothing the Iranian defense could do at all.
Well, I think the drone package was significant in that regard, because that's apparently, I don't know for sure, but that's what I'm hearing, and it makes sense to me militarily. The drones were designed well in advance to be in position in Iran in trucks or some other way, in order to take out the air defense facilities the moment they lit up, so to speak. And so you didn't even get a chance to go online if you were an Iranian air defense unit. You were attacked by these drones.
But they would have, so Israel would have to have knowledge about every single one of them. Is that really feasible?
Well, you'd only need a central location that was, within range of, say, batteries. So you wouldn't need but one truck, maybe two trucks, and enough drones on there that had a short flight time and a specific target to hit and munitions to hit it. You can't beat Mossad, MI6, and CIA in combination. That's incredible sources of ability to take you down.
I would like to ask you something. If you look at the combination between what's going on right now in America and this attack, my question would be, why now? Why did Israel attack right now? And I'm trying to get something out of here, or my other notes here.
Well, I really don't think the Trump administration, even the outside people that I referred to before who were looking forward to consolidating power around the Trump administration or under it, I don't think they had anything to do with this timing. I really do think Bibi Netanyahu had the timing, if you
That's
will,
what I'm referring to. That's what I'm
yeah,
referring to. Yeah.
in his hands. Now, this has proven once again that I'm right and Mearsheimer's wrong, in my view. I know that APAC is very influential. I know they're more influential than any other lobby group in the history of the United States. I know they have tons of money. I know they own congressmen and senators and representatives. But what's happening is Israel is doing what we want them to do, and we're taking no blame for it, or we're shedding the blame for it, if you will, which was what Trump's words were all about and what Rubio's official statement was all about. We didn't do this, we didn't do this, we didn't do this. Israel did it. Well, does anyone in the world anymore, anyone, not think that Israel is operating on the sheet of music we give them? I mean, that's insanity. To say that we're Israel's cuckold, that we are Israel's poodle, is nonsense. Israel is doing our dirty work for us.
And it has done so from the very beginning. And
Yes.
that's also the intent. Who said it? If we wouldn't have Israel, we would have to invent it.
Yes. Yes. I don't know who said that, but they were clever.
Yeah. So I have a little bit a problem of over preparation. I have so many notes that now I can't find what I'm looking for. But the governor of California said something in regards to, and this is where I make the connection. Yeah, the governor of California said something about the riots in America. So he said before Trump sent the troops, basically he could handle it. There was no crisis. It was only after Trump sent the troops that we had this massive blow up. Now I'm asking you. Is that coincidence that the whole world, or especially all of the Americans, are looking inside, and then Israel uses that specific time frame to, well, Israel, the, let's say the circle of friends, if you can call them like this, use exactly that specific moment in time to attack Iran? Is that really coincidence?
There could be something to that. I don't think, given the logistics of everything and the timeliness of it, that they were that well coordinated. But I take your point. And let me just back up a moment and tell you what I understand about LA and what I think is the future of this domestic unrest in the United States. I listened to the LAPD police chief, and I listened to the mayor, and I listened to Governor Newsom and others who I think know what they're talking about when they talk about California. And I gleaned from that conversation that I listened to that there are two elements, basically, more than two probably, but at least two fundamental elements in the LA situation. One of them, as the LAPD chief said very, very clearly, is exercising its constitutional prerogative. It's protesting, and it's basically well behaved, and it's basically operating during daylight hours. Now, this has sort of changed a bit as things get more tumultuous, but at that time, he said it's operating basically in daylight hours. The people who are burning and people who are sacking cars and attacking people and everything else are operating at night under time of darkness, which is one reason why they put the curfew in place. Then you look at that and you say, okay, there's an undercore there, and it's professional people doing this undercore action. They are rioters who are used to going to places like this and doing this sort of thing. And I would bet you a buck about three-quarters of them are MAGA people. And what's happening here is we've got this undercore coming in and making what would be a legitimate protest, maybe with a few problems that the police could handle, which is what the LAPD said. And these undercore people operating basically in the darkness are people who are not handleable, not manageable, because they're intent on wrecking and savaging everything in sight. And so you do need maybe the state National Guard. They could have handled it along with the LAPD. But then you get the circumstances where you can do what Trump wants to condition the American people to see. And that is the deployment of National Guards, not with the governor's permission, but federalized National Guard under the president's control. And then you will get active duty forces added to that, as we have seen in Los Angeles. And what do you add to it? You don't add the forces that might be most conducive to riot control. The United States Army, they actually train in it. You get the Marines. The Marines are the most vicious force you could put on the ground. And I say that with respect for the service I spent 12 years with, the Marines. They are proud of that. They knock down doors. They go over beaches. They storm people. They kill people. They're not riot control people. So you send them in. We're seeing preparation for what's going to happen in every state that is conceivable for it to happen in. And I suspect that's probably half of the United States before this administration gets through. So this is very disquieting, but it's to be expected, I think, because we've been headed towards this sort of situation ever since Bill Clinton was president of the United States.
I completely share your concerns, especially now with the Trump administration. I'm going on very thin ice with the next question. Would it be fair to compare, and again, feel free to disagree, yeah? What's happened, the MAGA movement in America with Hitler's brown shirts?
Well, I think there's a number of similarities. We were talking, a friend of mine, general officer in the Army, retired, stayed with me recently, and we were talking about this in terms of the Reichstag fire and what Hitler did after that fire and how it empowered him and how he propagandized it. But what he did was he used some of the other elements with whom he was in contention for ultimate power in Germany to do his dirty work for him.
Exactly.
Yeah, the brown shirts, for example. And then he got rid of them. He
That would be my next point. That would be my next point. Yeah.
That's we see that happening here. That's
Yeah.
what looks like it's going to happen here. We'll call in all these forces. We'll have them operate on our behalf, and then we'll get rid of them because we're not going to share power with anybody.
Exactly. And that's a really striking similarity that I found with the MAGA movement, especially those I don't know. Can you already call them civil militias or so? I mean, America is armed. I mean, the civil America is armed to the teeth. I believe there's no other country in the world who has so many guns per capita.
We have, if the FBI is accurate in its estimates, probably somewhere in the neighborhood of 400 to 500 million guns. Just think about it, 500 million private weapons. Now, of course, there are some homes that don't have any, and there are other homes that have 100 or maybe 200 and the ammunition and everything to go along with them. So when I've had conversations with FBI agents who were, more or less charged with kind of looking at this situation, they've said, if that ever is unleashed, there's no way we can even contend with it. But the question is, how does it get unleashed in some sort of organized way? Well, we just talked about that. You get it unleashed, if you will, with the kind of things that are happening in Los Angeles right now, but spread across the country. And you get people who join you in suppressing the people who are trying to protest. And you get people who are MAGA people to join you. You don't think about the brown shirts, think about the other elements that Hitler had to deal with before he consolidated power completely. And that's what we're looking at here. And it's well armed, as you said, probably better armed than any country in the world would be were similar circumstances to exist, because we have really zero gun control of any consequence.
And history shows that, and again, coming back to Ilan Pappe, but history shows that most of the time, there are exceptions, the left loses out. So for America, I fear that will be the same thing.
I'll give you one concrete example. The general and I were talking about this too. He asked me why I had a 45 caliber pistol beside my bed. And I said, it's loaded too. And he said, wow, there's just you here, though. I have no children in the house. My wife is dead. I said, that is to first shoot any Mossad guy who comes through the door. I know they'll get me. But I want to take one of them out. Second, to shoot any Ukrainian hit team that comes through the door. They'll get me too, but I want to take one of them out. Or anything else like that. Because, General, that's how fearful I am as an American citizen.
Now, I detect between the lines this is only half a joke. So how concerned are you, if I may ask?
As each hour goes by, I get more and more concerned. We, the general and I and some other people, Ben Cohen of Ben and Jerry's Ice Cream, held a demonstration of sorts on the Esplanade in front of Union Station, the major railroad station in Washington, D.C., yesterday, 11 o'clock in the hot sun. And the demonstration was called Up in Arms, and it's starting a movement across the country that will go under that signature, Up in Arms. And it's principally protesting the trillions and trillions of dollars that we're wasting on national security. Yeah. We had just a few people there, maybe 100 people or so, but we had TV cameras there. And that was the real motivation, was to have interviews and have a little talk and so forth, and then get this campaign started all across the country. And if you know Ben Cohen, he's of the Ben and Jerry's Ben.
He's under attack from Israel, yeah.
Yeah, he's got a lot of money, and he's willing to put it behind trying to get this military budget under control. So as we're sitting there in the hot sun, waiting for everything to start, several of us, all military veterans, were chatting, and we're saying, "You think we'll go to jail?" I said, "No, I don't think we will this particular occasion, but you ask a good question, because sooner or later they're going to have to take people like us out."
Communicator, and they're already busy with it.
Yeah.
Yeah. There is I mean, this is about Europe, so I don't know if you can comment on it. And I don't have all the details in my head, but there's a new council resolution from the European Parliament that allows now for European citizens without a trial to be arrested, to be depossessed, to be deplatformed, assets cut off. They can't even access their own bank accounts, etc., etc. It's brand new. It's about a month or 5 weeks old. Yeah, in Europe.
And where did they learn that from? Donald Trump, the United States Congress. I'm stunned that we've had some people I never thought would have objected to this sort of movement object. Marjorie Taylor Greene was one of them, if you know anything about Marjorie Taylor Greene.
No.
Republican, a staunch, radical Republican, I would call her. But she was not willing to go so far as to make anti-Semitism something that we would take people out of their homes into prison or deport them for. Even protesting on a college campus or protesting on the street corner or whatever. If you were judged an anti-Semite, and the rules for doing that were very, very easy to manipulate, you could be deported, you could be put in jail, you could be punished for exercising your constitutional right to free speech.
The images, again, I'm living here in the more or less safe Europe in the Netherlands, but the image that I see on social media from the ICE agents, not only that they arrest and how many they arrest per day, but also how they arrest the people with which brutality, and old women with kids, and I don't know what all, where it's clear. I mean, that there's one now. I just saw it, I think yesterday. They're virtually chasing a farm worker through the fields. There are 5, 6 of those ICE agents chasing one single lone little guy through the fields. I mean, America is built on immigrants, and the new Chancellor Merz, when he came to Russia, when he came to Washington, he reminded Trump that Trump's family is an immigrant with this nice little, what was it, the family tree that he brought to him, right? Sidetracking. How do you think Trump took it?
Well, I don't think that registers with Trump, really. I don't think he thinks about things with those kind of nuances and those kinds of angles, and you might say deep knowledge, or at least some knowledge of history and some knowledge of human realities. I don't think he doesn't deal in these things. I don't think he has an empathetic cell in his body. I don't think he has a sympathetic cell in his body, except for money, gold, filthy lucre. That's all he thinks about. That's all he wants to deal with. And everything he is designed around him is to increase not just his personal wealth, but those in his family whom he accepts as having the same philosophy he does, their wealth. That's his whole purpose in life. That's why he became president, was to garner more and more wealth, increasing wealth and the power necessary to do that. I really think that defines Donald Trump. If you wanted to find a fictional character in the world literature to be Donald Trump, it would be Goldfinger from the James Bond movie. But the people around him are very different. They're not necessarily not possessed of that kind of lust for riches, but their lust is for power that those riches bring. They would make a perfect group for Jeffrey Epstein, for example. Um, that's the kind of people that Epstein focused on. I'm convinced Epstein was a Mossad agent too, and he was operating not just for the business he was in, such as it was, but he was also operating to gather intelligence from Mossad to use in future cases of blackmail.
There is, of course, an indirect link between Epstein and the Mossad via Ghislaine Maxwell, whose father, Robert Maxwell, of course, was working for the Mossad. Stronger even, he sold encryption communication devices, Israeli encryption communication devices to governments around the world. It's debatable if he knew, but these encryption devices had back doors.
Yeah.
So the Mossad had access to any encrypted communication from those governments around the world. And I heard then at the moment when it wasn't going too well with him, he tried to extort in quotations money from the Mossad, and that's why we found him floating on the sea and nobody saw something, right? But there is a connection between Epstein via Ghislaine Maxwell to the Mossad, and I completely agree with you. Where are the tapes? Where are the hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of hours of tapes that Jeffrey Epstein recorded? Some of which, apparently, according to Elon Musk, have
Yeah.
recorded Trump.
Donald Trump. Yeah. It's a it's a mystery to me that we don't get more revelations from what is supposed to be an investigative mainstream media into these things, but they're just either incompetent or they're so cowed by the power structure that you never see it.
Mm. What about the story that Trump got a what is it an airplane for $500 million from Qatar?
I think that's just a tempest in a teapot, really. The idea that Qatar was trying to get rid of this airplane for years and couldn't, and then decided, what a propitious moment. Trump is coming to the area. We'll make him a gift of this pig that we couldn't get anybody to take. And Trump bought it, or he bought it in the sense that, he was for it. I don't know if it's going to come to fruition because the cost to do the things that need to be done to it, and the fact that it is not really um, how you might say up to date airplane are prohibitive in my view. I don't know why you would want to do this other than to say, oh, they gave me an airplane. Wow, this is wonderful. Because it's not ideal for what he needs it for, and to make it even remotely better is prohibitively expensive.
He would Qatar. Qatar was in the news not so long ago. I actually did a piece about it because they financed basically the inner sanctum of Netanyahu, maybe even Netanyahu himself.
Well,
So
they
to
work together. There's no question they work together. And Netanyahu was using them to fuel and fund Hamas because Hamas had the same motivation, objective, if you will, that he did, which was no two-state solution. Whereas Mahmoud Abbas and the Palestinian Authority, they were agitating for a two-state solution. So he didn't like them, but he liked Hamas. So he funded Hamas and he helped Hamas. He helped them get to the point where they could do what they did on October the 7th, and he damn well knows it.
yeah. If we circle back slightly to Iran, so we already established that Donald Trump only does things if it benefits him. So what's in for him as far as you can tell?
Well, here, I think he got himself out of a situation where he was thinking, short term thinking that he does, if I don't get a deal here, then I've got to bring the hammer down. And I do not want to bring the hammer down. And my Pentagon is telling me I shouldn't want to bring the hammer down. That is war with Iran. So, how do I get out of this dilemma I've gotten myself into? Witkoff, my special envoy, is telling me that he doesn't hold out a lot of hopes for this next and probably final meeting that was supposed to take place, I think, on tomorrow. So, how do I get out of this? And all of a sudden, Netanyahu gives him an escape avenue. Okay, I'm going to do this by myself. I need your help. I've already gotten your help for the last year or two from the intelligence agencies, just as Ukraine has been getting it, MI6, Mossad, CIA. And I've got 200 planes now. You know, my previous strikes were only 100 planes. I've got 200 planes, and I'm going to strike with 200 planes. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. And it's going to be a complete surprise because I've done all these things with your intelligence people to make it a complete surprise. And that is going to devastate Iran. And I'm also going to be brutal and murder, assassinate half their leadership in both the nuclear program and their military. So I'm going to go into their bedrooms and kill their women and children while I kill them. That's Israel's tactic. So Trump said, oh, wow, that gets me out of this bind I'm in, that I would have to do something like that in conjunction with you if I had to live up to my word about what I'll do if the deal fails. Go do it. So now he's got, you know, he thinks the best of both worlds. He's proven to the Iranians that not negotiating in good faith, as he looks at it, cost them a lot. And Israel did it. And we didn't have anything to do with it. And Marco Rubio has come out and said officially we didn't have anything to do with it, lying through his teeth, which seems to be a real quality of U.S. secretaries of state these days. Tony Blinken lied repeatedly over and over again about arms going to Israel not violating U.S. law. And now we got Rubio lying about this. And, you know, lying is a state of art for U.S. secretaries of state now, apparently.
There is, of course, also benefit for Netanyahu and for Israel. So Israel is losing the information war. You know, Israel's credibility and stand in the world is in free fall. So to ignite another war, to refocus the conversation, to get Europe back in line, because if you dissect Merz's statements and you read between the lines, and you see that even Germany is starting to shake a little, to wobble a little bit. Yeah. So this attack on Iran, can it bear fruition to what Netanyahu and his cabinet are planning in terms of re-imaging, you know, Israel?
Yeah. Well, one of the reasons they did it when they did it, and I think this was probably a huge component of the timing decision, was they were getting ready to collapse. People weren't paying a lot of attention to it. Haaretz was and was writing article after article about it. Others were inside Israel. You saw finally an opposition, a coherent opposition to Netanyahu developing. You could have probably gone another week or two, but they were going to have to deal with a possible collapse of their government. And then
define collapse.
Yeah.
Define collapse.
The coalition that Netanyahu is dependent on for this entire
okay. I thought you meant civil war, because that's exactly the topic I discussed with.
Well, that too. I mean, there's a potential for that too, but I think more important to Netanyahu was his government would have a trouble, and he wasn't actually sure that if elections had to be held, he could win them. So he personally could win them. So he timed this thing to to more or less preclude that, because now he can declare a state of emergency, which he has done. He's got everything closed down. He's got everything up to protect Israel from a retaliatory attack. And he's got a reason to say this is a genuine national security emergency, which he has declared now, and put everything in stasis in terms of the government, and then deal with Iran as he has to, because that's his ultimate and final purpose in life, is to take out Iran, to not just take out the nuclear program, but to make sure Iran is a vassal state. They can't do anything. When he stands up there in his perfect English and says he wants the Iranian people to be free, and he wants the Iranian people to, stand up and not have.
I heard it.
Now, what he's saying to 90 million, 50% of whom are Persian people, is I want you to be a vassal state of my state. That's what he's saying. And it won't take them very long to figure that out. If they threw away the Ayatollah, they threw away the IRGC and every other trapping of the Islamic Republic tomorrow morning, they would still have the national interest of a country called Iran positioned where it's positioned. And those national interests would dictate antagonism towards Israel, no question about it. So he's lying through his teeth, through his golden English fueled teeth, if you will, because he's a great spokesman in English. And why did he speak in English? Because he's not talking to the Israelis, he's talking to us. And he's talking to the rest of the English speaking world. He's saying, please forgive me for this because I know I'm a pariah. I know people hate me all over the world, but see, I had to do this. I had to do it. It was existential for Israel. We were going to disappear if we didn't do this. Well, I got news for you, Bibi. You're going to disappear anyway because the world is, and will do more of declared you a pariah. You're going to be very fortunate if you can survive as a state configured as you currently are, apartheid, dictatorship for all intents and purposes, any longer than another year or two, or maybe even another week or two. Now, I've said that before, and they seem to have this incredible resilience, but what is their resilience? Their resilience is they are the empire's attack dog in the Levant. Their resilience is the United States of America. That's why Netanyahu spoke in English.
What most Americans and probably also Israelis don't realize, one step back, I saw an interview where an elderly man was asked why he thinks that the Iranian hate the US. And he thought, and it was a kind of a poorer guy on a farm or so, yeah. And he thought, because they think we are rich, but we are not rich, yeah. So most of the Americans, they have no clue what, I mean, I have Kermit Roosevelt's autobiography behind me. He brags about how the CIA toppled a democratically elected, moderate Democrat Mossadegh and exchanged his government for one of the most brutal regimes on earth, the Shah Reza Pahlavi. And they don't understand how much hatred, how much, I don't know, suffering that regime has caused, and which ultimately led to the mullahs. So America is directly responsible for the mullahs in power today in Iran. But these kind of nuances.
I'll tell you something else. The average American has no idea about 99% of what we have done surreptitiously, clandestinely, covertly, however you want to say it, since World War II, and how increasingly over the last 15 to 20 years, that has dominated the security picture for the United States, for the empire, and even dominated it to the extent that presidents since Bill Clinton, probably a few before that, but it got discovered and stopped before that. But with Bill Clinton enters the succession of presidents without exception that the CIA, Mossad, BND in Germany, MI6 very much involved, from time to time, do operations presidents don't even know about, or prime ministers don't know about it. They linger between presidents when transitions take place. They keep on going. I have been present when some of this happened. So I know that these agencies are completely out of control, that their entities operate on their own sheet of music, often together, MI6 and CIA in particular, but also Mossad, that if one triumphs over the others more often than not, it is Mossad, and that relationship has no governmental control over it of consequence whatsoever from time to time. They are, in essence, a part of, if not an integral part of, what we call the deep state, these intelligence agencies. They have become, as Congress feared over the years, if you look at what Congress has legislated over the years in the empire, you'll see their growing fear about what intelligence centralized and modernized with the best technology, from satellites to eavesdropping equipment, you name it, what that meant in terms of democracy. In the last amendment to the National Security Act of 47, 48, they actually shied away from creating the Director of National Intelligence for that very reason. And then when they finally decided to do it, they did it only by stripping that position of people power and money power. In short, they gave that person no ability whatsoever to move people around in the intelligence community, now 17 entities strong and billions of dollars funded, and they gave them no money. Well, Donald Trump enticed Tulsi Gabbard to come into the DNI position by telling her he would reverse that. If Congress wouldn't change the legislation, he would give her money and give her people power. To this point, I don't think he's done that to any extensive degree, but he's holding it back to do. That's what Congress has been so fearful of for 50 years, consolidating so much power in the hands of one man or woman, and all these means of technology to look at everybody in the country, to look at everybody in the world, to tap their telephones, to tap their undersea cables, indeed, to destroy their undersea cables and pipelines, and all these other things that we've been doing. They were scared to death of doing that. Well, they've done it now. They have done it for all intents and purposes, with Trump going to put the last element to it when he gives Tulsi money and people power, if he does.
The combination of new technology and AI and social media is frightening to say the least.
It is.
The
I saw this big time. You know, when AT&T and Verizon and other big communications giants in America came together after 9/11, and we had these meetings, and we were reluctant to use them to the extent that the Patriot Act essentially allowed us to. So we had legislative power behind us to do these sorts of things, like spying on the American people. Um, you know what these big comm companies wound up doing? Salivating over this. They loved it. They didn't feel any problem with going after Americans, going after their data, going after the information about them. They didn't have any problem with that because they knew it was marketable. They knew the most marketable thing in the world was becoming information about people's desires, about people's wants, about their spending habits, about their tax habits, all these things, and about things that they might be saying that would be usable against them, or doing that might be usable again. Oh man, this is terrific. Look at the power we will have. AT&T, Verizon, look, we will be able to look into everybody's conversations. We'll be doing it for the government. We'll be doing it to prevent another 9/11. But look at the spinoff for us. And we can sell this information to all manner of other people who want this information too, who want to sell them dresses and kitchen aids and stoves and all the rest of the stuff. We'll know everybody's wants and desires. That's where we are now. There's no privacy left in America unless you're totally anonymous and nobody's interested in monitoring you. Even then, you're being monitored by an algorithm. You and I right now are being monitored not by an algorithm, but by a human being, because I've become so visible that the NSA monitors me, I think, right now with people, not just algorithms.
for reasons I don't want to get into now, I have a little bit of technical understanding, yeah. And despite my knowledge, I bought like 2, 3 months ago the new iPhone 16, and I did a piece on it, yeah, because people have absolutely no clue how far Apple goes in not only monitoring your behavior, but also predicting your behavior. And I'm not talking about selling something or buying something, but your actual behavior, what you're gonna do in certain circumstances. Yeah, the M1, M2, M3 chips, yeah, the new AI chips that Apple is using are a prerequisite for these kind of things. Just one thing that I could talk on this topic for a long time, yeah, but just one thing because it strikes to people's core. The images that people take on their iPhone are being analyzed and categorized. And in certain circumstances, there goes a red flag to law enforcement. Now, in some circumstances, I could imagine that's okay. Yeah, like child pornography or whatever. Yeah.
Right.
But there is no more demarcation line. Who decides what's right or wrong? Yeah. And again, there's much more than just images. I can tell you. And the most perverse part is that Apple actually had this slogan, and it was actually projected on a huge house when The Apple founder still was alive. What is on your iPhone stays on your iPhone. And technically, that's what they still claim, and that's technically still correct because the actual data doesn't go to Apple, but the metadata and the conclusion that the AI takes out of your information that goes to Apple. Yeah. So, yes, I completely agree. We are in a twilight world and we have only just started to see the effects of it. And a little thing, yeah. I do not believe that a actual person is monitoring you. Why? Because AI is 100 times better. AI analyzes everything you and me are saying. They analyze our sentiments. You know, I'm a behavior analyst. Yeah, my thesis was linguistic deception markers in high stakes business negotiations.
Yep.
So I know these systems are very smart. So there's nobody personally after you,
You're
but
probably right.
it's
You're
even
probably
worse.
right.
It's even
Yeah.
worse because they can predict your behavior in a variety of dimensions. Yeah,
Right.
that's the
Yep.
scariest thing.
You're
Um,
probably right.
Larry, I know you're very busy. You told me you have many hours of interviews in front of you. But before I forget, there's one question I cannot avoid asking you because personal curiosity. Now, Trump has survived a assassination. Someone shot him just scratching his ear. Yeah. Now, I also did a piece on that basically, but I have really close friends. They're here, let's say, special services in the Netherlands, and they all tell me the same thing. A bullet from that caliber that supposedly was used, when it comes so close to your ear that it scratches you and you have actually tissue damage, yeah, the tissue damage would be completely different. Not only from so not necessarily from the bullet, but from the shockwave that follows the bullet. So you as a professional soldier, have you ever seen that someone got scratched by the ear and this ear looks like in a Hollywood movie?
No, I have my deep suspicions about that event that it wasn't staged, and they come not just from the ballistics as you've described, but they come also from the actions of the Secret Service. My daughter was a Secret Service agent for about 8 years, and her husband was a Secret Service agent before she married him for a longer period. And that was the most unprofessional, incredibly discombobulated Secret Service response to that. And you wonder why. Was it because they were downgraded to the extent that there weren't real professionals there to take charge of the situation? Was it because they knew the thing was contrived? I don't know. And the other thing that bothers me is until yesterday, I had seen absolutely nothing. And maybe because of the concern that several of us registered yesterday, it suddenly appeared in the press that there was no follow up to this guy, no coverage whatsoever of what was happening to him or where he was. You know, well, if someone tried to assassinate the president, go back and look at any of the previous attempts. There were all manner of things that happened with the individual or individuals who were involved. We couldn't even find this guy's name anywhere. And then finally, yesterday, I think it was yesterday, late yesterday, we finally found it somewhere where a news reporter had picked up on it and was writing about where he was and what was happening to him. I don't know, but it's just funny. It's a funny situation. It was just too good to be true for Donald Trump.
Hmm. One last thing, if I may. We still have a couple of minutes. Yeah, one last thing, I promise. I interviewed Ivan Kachanovsky about the Maidan coup in 2014. He did extensive research. He wrote his PhD. He has hundreds and hundreds of hours of transcripts, of interviews, of intercepted radio communication. And he's convinced that there were snipers somewhere on a government building, and they shot both the demonstrators and the police. Yeah. So and Jeffrey Sachs agrees, Noam Chomsky agrees. I've spoken with them, so I think there's some credibility in regards to that statement. Now, what I saw recently, 2 or 3 days ago, at the demonstrations, I believe in LA, also on a government building, there were snipers on top. So I immediately had this vision from Maidan. It would be extremely easy to create a situation that would give Trump unlimited power if we had a similar scenario that happened on Maidan in 2014?
I wouldn't put that beyond the art of the believable or possible. I simply wouldn't. Like I said before, I found it very difficult to get to this point in my life. I mean, I'm 80 years old now. I've spent 40 plus years in the government one way or another. And that we would be at a point where not only would a civil war of some consequence be a very looming prospect, but also taking advantage of that would be a dictatorship that I can almost see the members of now. And I don't think that's a fancy. I don't think it's a pipe dream. I think it's a very, very logical plausibility.
Colonel Larry Wilkerson, any last thoughts? Any message to the world?
Yeah, Americans better wake up. And as a subsequent thought, people in the world better wake up too, especially in countries like France and Germany. Um, these are not leaders that are taking you anywhere you want to go.
On that note, I hope your words are heard. Larry Wilkerson, it was my pleasure talking to you. I really appreciate the time. I know you're extremely busy, and I'm happy you're so busy. Voices like yours have to get out. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Take care.
Bye.
Best of luck.